A Tale of Two Leaders, the U.S.-Ukraine Talks. Chapter 1. Two Very Different Men. In the early months of 2025, the world's attention turned toward the White House. Two leaders from two very different countries were about to meet. One man was Donald Trump, the newly re-elected President of the United States. The other was Volodymyr Zelensky, the President of Ukraine. Their countries were partners, but they were also frustrated friends. Ukraine had been fighting a terrible war for more than 10 years. Russia had attacked Ukraine in 2014, and the war never really ended. The United States gave billions of dollars to help Ukraine, but now, many Americans were tired. They wanted to know why they were still helping. They wanted to know when the war would end. Donald Trump, a businessman turned politician, had a very simple way of thinking. He liked deals. He wanted something in return for every dollar America spent. Volodymyr Zelensky was different. He was an actor before he became president, but after years of war, he became a symbol of courage. He believed in principles, not deals. He believed that Ukraine's freedom was more important than any agreement. This is the story of their difficult meeting, a story of culture clash, political tension, and personal pride. Chapter 2. The Invitation. The invitation came in January 2025. The letter, written on official White House paper, invited President Zelensky to Washington, D.C. We look forward to discussing the future of U.S.-Ukraine relations and working together toward peace and prosperity. It sounded polite, but Zelensky's advisors knew the truth. Trump did not want just a polite conversation. He wanted answers. He wanted to know how much longer the United States would need to support Ukraine. Zelensky knew this meeting would be the hardest of his career. Chapter 3. Arriving in America. Zelensky arrived at Andrews Air Force Base on a cold February morning. The sky was gray, and the air smelled like rain. Journalists stood along the runway, cameras ready. Zelensky's wife, Olena, stayed home in Kyiv. She worried about her husband traveling so far, but Zelensky told her, "This is my duty." As Zelensky stepped off the plane, he saw a large black limousine waiting. Inside the car, an American official handed him a folder. "This is President Trump's agenda for the talks," the man said. Zelensky opened the folder. The first line shocked him. Explore options for direct Ukraine-Russia peace negotiations, including potential territorial compromises. Territorial compromises? Give up land? To Zelensky, that was unthinkable. Chapter 4. The First Meeting. The Roosevelt Room inside the White House was warm and bright. Zelensky sat at one end of the long table. Trump entered the room, shaking hands firmly. "Volodymyr, great to see you," Trump said, smiling. "How's everything? How's the war?" Zelensky was surprised by the casual tone. "It is very hard, Mr. President. Every day our soldiers fight for survival." Trump nodded. "Well, let's get down to business." For the next hour, they talked about weapons, money, and American public opinion. Trump said, "Look, I like Ukraine. Great country, great people. But Americans want to know, when does this end?" Zelensky replied, "Mr. President, this ends when Russia leaves our land." Trump sighed. "See, that's the problem. Maybe you could make a deal. Maybe give them Crimea. Nobody really cares about Crimea, right?" Zelensky's face turned serious. Crimea is Ukraine. The atmosphere changed instantly. Chapter 5. Behind Closed Doors. After the first meeting, both leaders returned to their private offices. Zelensky's team felt frustrated. They knew Trump saw everything like a business deal. But for Ukraine, this was about life and death. Zelensky spoke quietly to his advisors. We must explain that this is not a negotiation over land. This is about justice. This is about international law. Meanwhile, Trump's advisors spoke to journalists. They said the president believes in peace through negotiation, they said. Sometimes peace means compromise. Chapter 6, Dinner Diplomacy. That evening, the two leaders had a private dinner. They ate steak and potatoes, and the mood was friendlier. At first, Zelensky told stories about life in Ukraine during the war, how families slept in basements, how children learned to recognize the sound of missiles, how grandmothers made camouflage nets for soldiers. Trump listened, but soon he returned to business. America has a lot of companies interested in your country, Trump said. You've got resources, minerals, oil, gas. Let's talk about partnerships. Zelensky agreed that Ukraine needed investment, but he was cautious. We want to work with American companies, but these resources belong to the Ukrainian people. We will not sell our future. Trump laughed. Everything's negotiable. Chapter 7. The Press Conference Disaster. On the second day, a press conference was held in the East Room of the White House. Reporters filled the room, their cameras flashing. At first, both presidents gave polite answers. But then a reporter asked Trump, "Do you support Ukraine's goal to take back Crimea and Donbass?" Trump's reply shocked everyone. Look, if they want peace, maybe they have to be realistic. Sometimes you have to give a little to get a little. Zelensky's face went pale. He stood up, looked directly at Trump, and said, "Ukraine will never give up its land. Our soldiers did not die for deals, they died for freedom." The room fell silent. The press conference ended early. Chapter 8. Fallout news of the argument spread across the world. In Moscow, Russian state TV celebrated. They said the Americans are tired of Ukraine, they said. Soon they will abandon them. In Kyiv, Zelensky gave a speech to his people. We are grateful for every friend who helps us, but we will never trade our land for peace. In Washington, Trump's team tried to calm the situation. They said the president supports Ukraine, they said, but every dollar America spends must benefit America too. For Chapter 9, Late Night Reflection. That night, Zelensky could not sleep. He stood by the window of his hotel room, looking at the Washington Monument. He remembered the first day of the war, waking up to explosions, calling his generals, recording messages for his people. He remembered visiting soldiers in hospitals, attending funerals, hugging mothers who had lost sons. In those moments, his mission became clear. He was not a negotiator. He was a protector. Chapter 10. The Last Meeting. On the final day, Trump and Zelensky met alone. No advisors, no cameras, just two men face to face. Trump said, "You're a brave guy, Volodymyr. I respect that. But America can't fight your war forever." Zelensky replied, "Mr. President, if you stop helping, the war will not end. It will come closer to you. Freedom is like fire. If you leave it alone, it dies." Trump was silent for a moment. Then he smiled. "You know, you could have been a great actor in America, maybe even bigger than me." Zelensky laughed. "But I'm not acting now." They shook hands. It was not agreement, but it was understanding. Epilogue. Lessons for the World. The U.S.-Ukraine talks ended without a perfect deal, but the world learned important lessons. Democracy needs courage. Partnership needs honesty. Peace without justice is not real peace. And for English learners reading this story, there is another lesson. Words have power. The right words, spoken with truth and heart, can change history.